you, Catherine, so much for joining me. So I'm Michelle Griffin, the owner of Griffin Resources, and we do provide outsourced solutions to small to mid-sized businesses with fractional HR, payroll, business solutions for sales and things of that nature. So we often work with people like yourself for benefits, and you actually have some unique ideas and things like that I want to make sure that a lot of employees and business owners know about. So if you can please introduce yourself, and then we'll jump right in.
Thanks so much for having me, Michelle. I really appreciate it. As you mentioned, I work in the employee benefits field. My name is Catherine Ratcliffe, and I'm the owner of STR Benefits Consulting. So we provide a number of services from independent consulting to brokering actual benefit programs for employers. So I have the opportunity to work with a lot of different industries and work with both the employees directly as well as the employers and the providers that they choose to work with.
And so I wanted to talk today a lot about the disaster relief, or just situations that a lot of employees and employers are in right now because of the latest Hurricane Helene. And also right now we're starting to see the organization of a storm coming right in behind it. So there's potential additional damage that's going to compound damage that's already there. So can you kind of talk a little bit about, obviously there's resources that employers have and employees have. And one of the things that you had mentioned to me was the 401k solution and things like that. So what are some ideas that you think would be unique that people need to know about when it comes to some financial solutions that could be out there for them?
Sure. So the biggest financial opportunity is, of course, with retirement. And that is anytime you're located in a disaster area where there's something like this, be it a fire, a storm, a tornado, anything like that, you have the opportunity to tap into your retirement funds and take a withdrawal or a loan, depending on what type of program you have. If you have an IRA, it's going to be a full distribution of that dollar amount. And you have the option to prorate those taxes over, a couple of years, up to 3 years. If you have a 401k, 403b, or a 457, then you have the option to either do a loan or to do a straight distribution. And again, work with that 3-year period. When you are with an employer, some of that depends on the structure that the employer has put into place in advance, but those tools and resources are available there. And it's a way to, obviously nobody wants to tap into retirement before you need to, but when you're talking about situations like we've seen with this past storm, where there's a lot of gaps in coverage, because when it hit through sort of the Tampa Bay area and the coastline, really up from Bonita Springs onward, it was not considered a hurricane. And so for a lot of people that had damage, it was flood related damage. And so if you didn't have a flood policy, or even if you did have a flood policy, there's really stringent limits on there. And so people are looking for immediate cash to be able to help offset some of those damage and repair costs, or even relocation costs, while they're working through with insurance companies. So it's a way to tap in very quickly to some resources to bridge that gap. And then I think for employers to also think every storm season, and of course in Florida we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have fires, there's a number of different seasons. There's different levers that can come into play when you're looking at how you best support your team in advance of those storms. I think the advantage with hurricane season, if there is one, is that we do have a little bit more notice than you do when, say, there's a tornado coming. And so there's a lot of time that you can reach out, like this one that's coming or allegedly coming towards Tampa, where you can reach out to your team members and you can say, hey, if you're low on prescriptions, we have options to waive the early limitations for refilling your medications, because a lot of plans have a threshold in place where it's either 75 or 85% of the way through you have to get to before you can refill it again. And when these types of disasters come about, then the insurance companies go ahead and provide some relief, and they can allow you to refill those prescriptions early, particularly if you have to evacuate. So we've seen coverage of people, that are out of insulin and those types of things. It's a good way in advance to get that medication ahead of time. Same thing when you are displaced. You may have evacuated outside the area and you need that medication refilled at a pharmacy that you don't normally go to. These are ways that, by getting in front of it, both pre-disaster and post-disaster, employers can communicate with their team members to say, hey, we can refill your medication, we can replace your medication, here's how you do that. And so and that's true too, even with prior authorizations. There are some people, when you think about the demographics of a team, and you might have people that don't really see a doctor on a regular basis. And then you have other people that are actively going through chemotherapy or need dialysis on a regular basis. And to have a disruption for an evacuation, that can be the decision about whether or not they evacuate or they don't, is if they're unsure of where they're going to be able to go for dialysis. So again, getting in front of those issues so that they do feel safe to evacuate, because they know that there's care coordination available for them. And that's really where an employer would lean in with a broker and a plan to help with that.
So that's one of the things I was going to ask you. How would employers know to ask these kinds of questions? A lot of them, they may have a human resources representative, but even sometimes a human resources representative may not know the right questions to ask to get this kind of guidance if their broker's not already offering it, or if they don't have a good communication with their broker and things like that. If their broker might just be a little more passive and not have active communication, and then they don't know what they don't know. So what are some of the, questions that employers and human resources can be asking to make sure that they're getting the answers that they need to give this information to their employees? Is it about how to make sure that they know that their prescriptions can get filled if they switch to a different pharmacy, for example, like you mentioned, or if they have to go out of state? And they're evacuating, a lot of times people in Florida, they're obviously evacuating, north and even onward, depending on the track of the storm. And so what happens when they have to have medical care and they might have a restricted geographical location plan, things like that are going to come up. So how can employers and HR help their employees be ready for some of those questions and get proactive in front of some of those materials for them?
So it's a great question. So each party, both the carrier and the broker, should have a planning calendar that covers these types of things. So you obviously have an open enrollment timeline and calendar that you're working off of, a wellness calendar that you may be working off of, where you're reminding people about flu shot activity. These types of events, hurricanes, tornadoes, and fires, are also things that you should have a calendar for, so that you can say, pre-hurricane season, we're going to push this out to the team members. And then also when you're working with your carriers, because you have a number of them, of course, you have your workers' compensation carrier, you've got your property and casualty, you've got your health, dental, vision, all of these different providers. They will each have different resources for you that falls within the scope of what they do. And so when you're going through that carrier selection process, whether it's a renewal or not, those are some of the questions you want to ask. What do you provide in the event we go through a hurricane or a mass flood or a disaster situation? What can we communicate to our team? A number of carriers were very proactively sending out information this past week about what to do if you did need to have your dialysis moved to a different location, if you were pre-authorized for a specific imaging, whether it's an MRI or a CAT scan, and you needed to move it to a different location, what waivers were in there. I think from a cost perspective too, there's the option to go back to those carriers and say, I need an extended grace period, because we've been devastated, especially when you look at employers that are smaller businesses, individuals that have, more of hospitality driven, where they just lost their customer base and they're not sure when they're going to be up and running again. And it's going to take some time to get assistance, whether it's from SBA or insurance. And so they need an extra 30-day grace period. Those are communication pieces that, you should be having with those carriers, literally every vendor, whether you're talking about about, Spectrum or United Healthcare, you should be having those conversations and saying, hey, this is where I'm at. I need some help. What provisions are there? I think also within the employee assistance program, make sure you have one. Oftentimes they're next to nothing to add to a plan, but it can provide a lot of resources and support beyond your team member. So the employee assistance program is designed for the entire household. So for me, my household includes my daughter who's in school in Tallahassee, and they had to evacuate last week. So for an 18-year-old who's facing this for the first time without a parent, for me it was stressful, for her it was stressful to understand, like, what are the things I should bring, when should I leave, what should my communication plan be with professors and other people, my job, because she works up there, those types of things. And EAP is really good about providing supports and resources. And we've seen where they've really stepped up to the plate here with people who have family members that are outside the state in the really affected areas of North Carolina and Tennessee, where I haven't been able to get in touch with somebody. I'm not sure what to do. How can I help? I feel really emotional because I've got damage here, but they've got so much more damage. What can I do? Those are instances where you can get 24 hour a day, 7 days a week, counseling and support at no cost. So there's a lot of services that are available. Even when that student goes back, depending on where you were, there were places that flooded that you didn't expect to flood. And so some folks are really struggling with some of what they went through. And then now we've got another storm coming. And, certainly with the current track of the storm, I wouldn't have my daughter evacuate to me here. But if she's worried about me, what does she do? How can I provide supports for her? So a lot of these programs really look at your team member from a holistic perspective and say, these are all the different ways, not just you, the team member, but your family members. I would say with the bill negotiation too, a lot of people are on payment plans with hospital bills. They walk away from a hospital bill where they've got, maybe they just had a baby or a procedure and they're on a payment plan. That's another opportunity to call and say, listen, I was affected by this storm. I need, a deferral, an extension, and those providers will absolutely work with you.
Yeah, I wanted to talk more about the grace period and the options with bills, even from an employer perspective and an employee perspective, because you kind of bring up both. So from an employer perspective, if the business is impacted, rather than just not paying bills and seeing a lapse, because that can cause a lapse in coverage, you really should be calling and talking to your broker and to the carriers and making sure that you do have an extension record on your file, so that there isn't just a situation where it's not recognized and you end up just skipping a payment and then you have a lapse in coverage. So you can't just assume that some of those things are obviously just going to take care of themselves or going to cause more problems by not having those good conversations and then making sure that they're documented properly so that you can protect your company when it comes to some of those things. Also with the grace period for individuals and their bills and medical bills, it's definitely important to have those payment plan conversations and things like that. Especially right now when we're kind of in between storms, and I believe there's also a scheduled another one behind this, depending on where the storms start to form. So there's other areas of interest that they're still following right now in the Gulf. So I feel like there's moments when you can take the time to have these conversations and organize yourself, like you said, restocking on supplies, but also think of it as refilling your prescriptions and making sure that you have a plan, and that is in your evacuation plan includes what you're going to do about your medications. I also like that you brought up the mental health aspect of it, either through an EAP program or using your health insurance or other resources that you may have to make sure that you're also taking care of your mental health, because these are very stressful situations. People think of let's say the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, like the bottom layer just being your environment and do you have shelter and food, which is obviously a huge necessity, and you really can't take care of yourself unless you at least know your basic needs are covered. But then it also comes into play, if you think of being on an airplane, putting your own air mask on before helping others. So it's like you really have to make sure that you're in a good mental state, because you do have family members, especially people with young children, and things like that, to have to worry about when you're, and or children that are out of the house and young and even away from you, which is also a very stressful and unique situation too, where they might be in the storm's pathway and the parents aren't even in the same state, or vice versa. So those are some really interesting situations, and to think about all the employees' mental health. Is there I guess like some financial help when it comes to, and I kind of want to go back to the 401k for just a second, because what you were talking about as far as taking distributions, that's not the same as a hardship loan, which you can have as a hardship loan. So when you're in when you're affected by a dedicated named area, like if it, for example, like you said, some areas weren't considered part of the storm, but were still affected by floods. So for people to be able to take advantage of some of these programs where they can, take withdrawals with or without getting penalties, because their primary residence was affected, do they have to be specifically in, evacuation zones or areas that were directly affected and named by the storm in order for insurance or 401ks and things like that to help them, or for them to be acknowledged that they need this kind of help? Or how can they be an advocate for themselves if they were impacted, but not necessarily in the direct storm's path?
So the first thing is really to call your financial advisor, and that should be part of your plan, because there's a number of different times that you can utilize this. You don't have to be within the geographic area, because everybody's situation is different. And, again, you could have a child that's away in college and they're now displaced and you need to figure something out. So the language around that Secure 2.0 Act is very loose when it comes to, are you in this zone or not in this zone? Do you have insurance or not? It doesn't really go through a lot of those questions. You just really need to call your financial advisor or speak to your HR department about, this is what I need. This is, what I want to apply for. You don't have to go through the HR arm. If you're on a plan, you can reach out directly to the plan to discuss your options, which is a really nice feature as well, because it's different than a traditional hardship loan where there is a lot of involvement and a lot of paperwork. They've really eased a lot of those things. There's even an option within that Secure 2.0 Act where, you can take money out for student loan payment options too, which can sit on top of this. So you might, again, when you're sitting there, and, I think about somebody who is maybe a travel nurse that doesn't have a dedicated, I'm working every single day, or somebody in hospitality where now I'm displaced for a period of time. Those types of scenarios, you've got a lot of different bills coming at you, and some of them are obvious and some of them are not. Again, calling into every lender and saying, hey, I'm going to have trouble with my car payment this month. What can I do? Every bank posted different options that were available, from waiving ATM fees if you were displaced and away from a place that, they banked at regularly, those types of things. Every single vendor had options available, but most people don't know about it. And so the great thing when you do have an EAP, and I would encourage every employer to encourage their team members to use that in that May, June period of time before we really get into heavy hurricane season, to say, let's make a plan. Let's talk about what we need to do, because you're right. The basics of, do I have shelter? Do I have water? Those are the things people worry about in the beginning. And then when disaster really strikes, it's, I don't have any communication device, or, I don't have medication for my animals, or I don't know where to, I didn't think I needed to evacuate, and now I don't know what to do with my animals. And does a shelter only take dogs and cats, or can I, bring my son's snake with me? Like all of these things that suddenly in the moment become a crisis and just elevate everything that much more. That's where an EAP plan and coming up with that disaster and evacuation plan are really important ahead of time, so that you can look at those things. But that Secure 2.0, it even gives you the option, if you're a victim of domestic violence, no questions asked, you just call your financial advisor and you can take a certain amount of money out. So it's really liberated a lot of those boxy rules, because again, when you're looking at these situations, this storm had such an impact you may not have been able to get in touch with your HR director. There were offices that were completely wiped out. They may not have had the records. I had a client once lose an entire building. More than once I've had clients lose entire buildings, and they physically couldn't get in to make the payment to the insurance carrier. And so walking through and communicating with what those issues are, and technology has come a long way since COVID, where we're less so writing manual checks, but some businesses still do. And so if you are that business that your check signer is displaced and you can't get in to get your records, and you don't know how to log into the system and make an online payment to Florida Blue or to United, those are things that you can easily just call the number on the back of your ID card, take a picture of these things, maintain as many records as you can, and so that you can call and get through those processes. I would say also, as part of that disaster plan, make sure there's more than one contact listed with each of those carriers. A lot of employers make the mistake of saying, I'm the CEO or I'm the CFO, I'm going to be the contact. And that's great until you're displaced or you're unavailable. And then now it's a whole procedural issue to get you to be able to authorize certain things to happen with the plan.
That makes sense. What are, for employers and for some advice for them, if they don't have an EAP option, what are, and obviously this is a good talking point for coming up into the first of the year, because a lot of plans renew on the first of the year. And I know a lot of my clients are much smaller, and they may be offering medical, dental, visions, and that might be it. Some might also add short-term, long-term, and life. And oftentimes there isn't a discussion about an EAP program, or the carriers that they're talking to don't have EAP programs, or they might not even offer benefits at all. So how do employers get an EAP program? What kind of carriers provide them? And how can they make sure to be prepared next time if they don't have that now?
So, great question. Most of the carriers that operate in an insurance space on a group level have an EAP at their disposal, whether you have it or they don't. And so it's, you have it or you don't, they have it available so they can trigger certain things. So some of the things that some of the carriers put into place this past week was, even if you didn't have an EAP, they gave it to you. They provided those resources and those tools for this window of time. Not forever, but for the next 10 days, if anybody needs help, you can access this EAP program, and they gave everybody a login for that so that you could utilize that. So again, it's not a forever solution, but it's we're in crisis mode, and we want to take care of everybody. And especially on the medical side, a medical carrier's worst case scenario is you have an uncontrolled diabetic that is having issues and they don't know what to do, or you've got somebody else that's just had surgery and they're not sure what to do, and so they want to be all hands on deck as much as possible in making sure that people have the resources and tools that they need. And so they will often offer up those services. EAPs are typically bundled in with disability insurance. So if you have a disability policy, very often you have one. You may not know that you have it, but because there is a mental health component to disability insurance, it's very often embedded in there. So it's a good time to reevaluate what you have that you may not realize that you have. You can often add a standalone EAP for a little more than $1 per employee. So again, you might be in a position where you say, I just can't afford benefits. And I can totally appreciate that. This might be a scenario where you say, but I do want to offer an EAP because I don't have the HR resources to be able to provide all these supports, and my team members need this. And so it's a really good time to reevaluate those components. But again, there are other, if you're a member of an association, a lot of times those associations will have employee assistance programs running in the background that during a crisis like this, you can tap into it, whether it's an association of realtors or veterinarians or whomever it is. They will deploy additional EAP resources for things like this, because everybody needs help. And it's about triaging, all of those different concerns.
So if there are employees that maybe they're listening to this or through other avenues learn that they need resources like this, If they contact their human resources or a business owner, they're not familiar with, just, even checking if they've been given these temporary solutions. What are some advice that you can give? Obviously, I would think my first answer would be to go to your broker and start having questions rather than just telling employees, no, we don't have that.
Right.
So make sure that they have, those good numbers and contact information available to them, whether it be HR or the business owner, whoever, like you said, might be whoever is said to be the go-to person for the employees. When people are obviously like kind of just scrambling and trying to figure things out, do you have advice for obviously employees or just people in general, I guess, to stay organized, and especially kind of knowing the real estate industry too, people preparing their houses, and kind of, I assume that, there may be resources out there that I'm not familiar with on checklists or just kind of, other than Googling things, but do you know of anything that kind of like gives people prepared lists? And maybe it's something, just being a broker, you might have go-to lists and things like that you provide, but what are some things that people can do to make sure that they, don't forget something, or that they're asking their employer for the right resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So the good news is every state and usually every county has a sample list of what you can pull down for a checklist. You may want to, as an employer, brand that a little bit more in terms of making sure team members are communicating with you if they do choose to evacuate or relocate. You may need to have that for staffing purposes. You may need to have that just for, I have no idea where you've gone and I don't know how to get in touch with you. There's all sorts of reasons why you would want to add some additional information in there from an employer's perspective. But every state emergency preparedness site, Florida has a great one that goes through a lot of these questions and answers. I think people look at it and they're like, oh yeah, hurricane season, flashlight, batteries, water, canned food, got it. And it's a lot more involved than that, especially as we age and things change a little bit. If I go over, I've been in Florida now for 26 years. Well, what I would have thought about 26 years ago in terms of what I would have brought versus today, they're very, very different. And, the things that I'm constantly reminding my daughter about, and that's again, where you're trying to reach team members and their struggles are different. And so for me, the validity of what I'm saying, it diminished immediately as soon as my daughter got to college, right? So having something with somebody else's logo instead of this is just mom telling you, make sure you top your car up, those types of things. It's really helpful because people don't think of those things. Having some cash on hand because credit card machines might be down. Communicating with your employer, again, if you are an employer who only issues manual checks, because there's a lot of team members that they're not bankable in that they don't have a bank that has a lot of banks charge fees if you don't have a minimum amount in your account. So there's a lot of team members that want a paper check and they'll take it to a check cashing place. Well, then when a storm comes like this and banks are down or those places are down and, now they're not sure how to get those funds and they've got to make payments. So working through some of those basic financial components that are not necessarily intuitive to us. Again, making sure my daughter knows where to get cash and those types of things. It's important. And you don't think of those things right away. Having, the water's great, but do you have personal hygiene items that you would need? And, what's your communication plan with everybody around those types of things too? Because if you are trying to conserve water, if you are trying to figure out how you deal with a bathroom situation where there's no running water and you can't, they're asking you not to flush a toilet. What do you do? There's a lot of resources that are out there on those sites with informational pieces that you should take. You should meet with your family and discuss in advance of storm season. But then certainly now everybody should be talking again. What does this look like? The challenge we have now is we just went through a bad storms. There's been supply chain issues the last week. And we're facing another storm too. So how do you keep people balanced to where they're not then hoarding everything
Mhm.
and, making sure that there's enough for all. And a lot of that goes back to some of those anxiety and mental health issues where you can talk through some of these issues with somebody. People often think they're fine when they're not, and then all of a sudden they just break.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been enlightening for me, which every time we talk, it's been nice because I tend to learn something new, which has been great for me. And I'm hoping that other people who take the moment to check in and read and see this, then we can hopefully help other people. And we'll make sure that we have your contact information and out for employers if they are not getting this kind of communication and service with their broker. These are things that you should be getting with your broker already. These shouldn't be difficult resources to have as an employer through your own broker, and you should be having this kind of education handed to you. So if you are a struggling employer that these are not the kind of services you're getting, then you're truly missing out on being able to support your employees. So and same thing with employees. If you're not getting these kinds of resources or having this kind of information distributed to you from your employer, that's also a gap in what you could have as an employee. So these are definitely some situations where people find themselves in that they end up not thinking about right away. And I think even the hurricane storm season in Florida has often not been taken as seriously throughout the years if it's only a category 1 kind of situations. But we've now seen literally the storm of a century directly followed by what is looking to be a category 2 right behind it. So these are some really potentially devastating times for employees, and it's definitely a time to be very empathetic to people that are going to be rather displaced and what that means to the workforce. And so I really thank you for your time and for all of your knowledge and your wisdom. And it's really been great and a lot of knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I appreciate it.
Thank you.